Tonight we journey through the extraordinary life of Muhammad, from an orphan child in the deserts of Arabia to the final messenger of Allah, whose revelations would shake empires, transform hearts, and guide humanity until the end of time. This is the story of divine light emerging from human darkness, of mercy clothed in humility, and of a message that began in a cave and illuminated the world, as gentle rain falls like divine mercy upon the earth. Before we begin, I love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Share it in the comments below, and let's see how beautifully far and wide the words of the Qur'an travel. We reflect upon Surah Muhammad, the 47th chapter of the noble Qur'an, revealed to honor the one whose name it bears. Let the rhythm of these blessed drops remind us of Allah's continuous blessings as we walk through the sacred landscape of prophetic history. In the year 570 CE, known among the Arabs as the Year of the Elephant, when Abraha's mighty army approached the sacred Kaaba with war elephants only to be turned away by flocks of birds carrying stones of divine wrath, a light entered the world in the heart of Makkah, among the noble Quraysh tribe. In a humble dwelling, Amina bint Wahb gave birth to a child whose father, Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, had already returned to his creator. This orphaned infant would be named Muhammad the Praised One, a name chosen by his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, who sensed something extraordinary in the child's presence. "I want him to be praised in the heavens and on earth," the elder declared, unknowing that his words carried the weight of divine destiny. The newborn's earliest days were spent in the care of Halima al-Sa'diyah, a wet nurse from the Banu Said tribe. It was customary for noble Arab families to send their children to the desert's purity, away from the city's corruption. Halima would later recount how blessings rained upon her previously impoverished household the moment she accepted this child. Her barren livestock suddenly gave abundant milk, her weak donkey gained strength, and prosperity touched every corner of her life. Even in infancy, there was something different about Muhammad. Desert dwellers spoke of unusual gentleness in his nature, an otherworldly peace in his eyes, and an honesty that seemed to emanate from his very soul. When Christian monks and Jewish scholars encountered the boy during trade journeys, they would pause, studying his features with recognition, as if ancient prophecies stirred within their hearts. Tragedy struck early when Amina fell ill during a journey to Yathrib and passed away, leaving 6-year-old Muhammad completely orphaned. His grandfather Abdul Muttalib embraced the boy with fierce love, but fate proved relentless. When Muhammad reached 8 years, his grandfather too was called to the grave. The orphan child was then entrusted to his uncle Abu Talib, a man of modest means but unwavering loyalty, who would protect his nephew with his life for decades to come. As Muhammad grew into manhood, the people of Makkah recognized an extraordinary character walking among them. In a society steeped in tribal warfare, idol worship, and moral decay, he stood apart like a beacon of light. He never bowed before the 360 idols housed in the Kaaba. He never spoke falsehood. He never participated in the injustices that plagued his society. His honesty in trade earned him the title Alani, the trustworthy inn, a name that preceded him through every marketplace and gathering. During these formative years, Muhammad would often retreat to the cave of Hira, high in the mountains surrounding Makkah. There, beneath the vast Arabian sky pierced by countless stars, he would spend days and nights in contemplation, his heart heavy with the spiritual emptiness he witnessed in his people. He wept for their condition, prayed in the manner of his forefather Ibrahim, and listened with his soul to whispers carried on the desert wind. The world below was lost in darkness. The powerful oppressed the weak, the wealthy ignored the poor, daughters were buried alive, and lifeless idols carved by human hands received worship due only to the Creator. Muhammad's pure heart yearned for truth, for justice, for the light that could heal his people's wounds. He brought only dates and water to sustain his body, but his spirit feasted on solitude and divine remembrance. Night after night, year after year, he returned to Hira's rocky embrace. The cave became his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world fell away and only truth remained. His soul trembled with anticipation, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the moment when heaven would touch earth, when divine revelation would descend upon a heart prepared through decades of purity and contemplation. The rain continues to fall as we pause here, droplets carrying the echo of that sacred time when a man sat alone in a cave, unknowing that he was about to receive the first verses of a revelation that would transform not just his life, but the destiny of all humanity. In these moments of solitude, the foundation was being laid for a message that would soon shake empires and awaken hearts across the earth. It was during the blessed month of Ramadan, in the 40th year of Muhammad's life, that the silence of centuries was finally broken. The cave of Hira, which had witnessed countless nights of contemplation and prayer, was about to become the birthplace of divine revelation. On this night, unlike any other in human history, the boundary between heaven and earth would dissolve. Muhammad sat wrapped in his cloak, lost in deep meditation, as had become his custom. The desert air was still, carrying only the faint whispers of wind through the rocky peaks. His heart, purified through decades of seeking truth, beat with the rhythm of one who had prepared his entire life for this moment without knowing it. The Qur'an would later describe this night as Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power, when angels descended and divine decree was determined. Without warning, the cave filled with an overwhelming presence. Light blazed forth, not from fire or sun, but from a source beyond human comprehension. The very air seemed to pulse with divine energy. Before Muhammad stood a magnificent being of incomprehensible beauty and power, Jibril, the archangel Gabriel, appearing in his true celestial form with 600 wings that filled the horizon. The angel's voice thundered through the cave and shook the foundations of creation itself. Iqra, read. Muhammad, trembling with awe and terror, could barely form words. "I cannot read," he stammered, for he was among the unlettered of his people. The angel embraced him with such force that he felt his very breath would be pressed from his body, then released him and commanded again, "Read." Once more Muhammad replied, "I cannot read," and once more the angel seized him in that overwhelming embrace. A third time the command came, fierce and undeniable, and this time the words followed like rivers of light pouring into his consciousness. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know." The verses burned themselves into Muhammad's memory with divine fire, each word perfectly preserved, each syllable carrying the weight of absolute truth. These were not the words of any human poet or soothsayer. They possessed a beauty, power, and authority that transcended mortal speech. The Arabic language itself seemed to bend and soar to accommodate meanings too vast for ordinary expression. When the angel departed, Muhammad found himself alone, gasping and trembling in the suddenly empty cave. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. The words continued to echo in his mind with crystal clarity, as if inscribed upon his very soul. He stumbled from the cave into the pre-dawn darkness, his legs weak beneath him, looking up at stars that now seemed to pulse with new meaning. Terror and wonder warred within his breast as he made his way down the mountain. What had he experienced? Who was this mighty being? What did these words mean for his life, for his people, for the world? The weight of divine responsibility settled upon his shoulders like a mantle he had never sought but could not refuse. In his confusion and fear, Muhammad's feet carried him home to the one person whose love and wisdom he trusted above all others, his beloved wife Khadijah bint Khuwaylid. She had been his companion for 15 years. a woman of noble character who had seen his truthfulness in every word and deed. If anyone could help him understand what had occurred, it would be she. Bursting through the door of their modest home, Muhammad could barely speak. Cover me, he gasped, his body shaking uncontrollably. Khadijah, alarm filling her eyes, quickly wrapped him in blankets and held him close, her steady presence an anchor in the storm of his emotions. She asked no questions, made no demands, simply waited with the patience of a woman who had learned to trust in her husband's integrity completely. When his trembling finally subsided enough for speech, Muhammad told her everything, the overwhelming presence in the cave, the magnificent being who had appeared, the words that had been pressed into his consciousness like molten gold. Khadijah listened without interruption, her face growing more radiant with each detail he shared. When he finished, she took his hands in hers and spoke words that would echo through history. Rejoice, O son of my uncle, and be of good cheer. By him in whose hand is Khadijah's soul, I believe you will be the prophet of this people. Allah would never disgrace you. You maintain family ties, you help the poor and destitute, you serve your guests generously, and you assist the deserving calamity-afflicted ones. Her faith in him became his foundation. Where he saw only confusion and fear, she recognized divine appointment. Where he questioned his worthiness, she affirmed his character. Khadijah led him to her elderly cousin Waraqah ibn Nawfal, a learned man who had studied the earlier scriptures and understood the signs of prophecy. When Waraqah heard Muhammad's account, his aged eyes filled with tears of recognition. This is the same angel who came to Moses, he declared. You are the prophet of this people, but I warn you, they will call you a liar. They will persecute you, they will drive you from this land. No man has come with what you bring without facing opposition. The rain falls heavier now, as if the heavens themselves weep at the memory of that sacred night, when divine revelation first touched human consciousness. In that cave on Mount Hira, the final chapter of prophetic history had begun. The last messenger had been chosen. The final book was starting to descend, and a light had been kindled that would never be extinguished. Muhammad now understood his purpose, though the full magnitude of his mission remained hidden. He had been selected not because he sought power or glory, but because his heart was pure, his character unimpeachable, and his soul prepared through 4 decades of righteous living. The same God who had sent revelations to Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa had now chosen him to carry the final message to all humanity. The revelation did not come again for many days, and in that silence, Muhammad experienced what scholars would call the fatra, the interval. Doubt crept into his heart like shadows at dusk. Had he imagined the encounter in the cave? Was he losing his mind as his enemies would later claim? The absence of the angel's voice felt like abandonment, and he wandered the hills around Makkah, searching the horizon for signs that his experience had been real. Then, as suddenly as it had ceased, revelation returned. While walking through the streets of Makkah, Muhammad heard a voice calling from above. Looking up, he saw the same majestic being who had appeared in the cave, now seated upon a throne that bridged the heavens and earth. Wherever he turned his gaze, the angel remained visible, a confirmation that his calling was genuine and his mission divinely ordained. The verses of Surah Muhammad descended like gentle rain upon his heart. O you wrapped in garments, arise and warn and magnify your Lord and purify your garments and shun uncleanness. The command was clear. The time for private contemplation had ended. He must now carry the message to his people, beginning with those closest to him. But Allah's wisdom decreed that the call should start quietly, like the first light of dawn that gradually illuminates the world. For 3 years Muhammad shared the revelation only with his family and closest friends, building a foundation of faith that would withstand the storms to come. This was not cowardice but divine strategy. The message needed roots before it could grow branches. Khadija became the first Muslim, her belief unwavering from the moment of his return from the cave. Her acceptance gave Muhammad strength beyond measure, for in her eyes he saw not madness, but prophecy, not delusion, but divine truth. She would spend her wealth freely in support of Islam, purchasing the freedom of persecuted slaves and providing for the early community when others turned away. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's young cousin who lived in their household, was among the first to embrace Islam. Though only 10 years old, Ali possessed a wisdom and courage that surpassed his years. When he heard the call to worship Allah alone, he responded without hesitation, "This is what I was created for." His youth protected him from the social pressures that made conversion difficult for older men bound by tribal loyalties. Zayd ibn Haritha, the beloved adopted son who had chosen to remain with Muhammad even when his own father came to reclaim him, naturally followed his adoptive father into the new faith. His loyalty and devotion would remain constant through every trial, earning him the unique honor of being mentioned by name in the Qur'an. Then came Abu Bakr, Muhammad's dearest friend and companion, whose acceptance of Islam would prove transformative. When Muhammad shared the revelation with him, Abu Bakr's response was immediate. "If you say it, then it is true." His unwavering belief earned him the title as Siddiq, the truthful one. More importantly, his conversion opened doors throughout Makkah, for he was a respected merchant whose character was beyond reproach. Through Abu Bakr's influence, other notable figures embraced Islam. Uthman ibn Affan, a wealthy and pious merchant, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, whose generosity would later support the entire community. Zayd ibn Abi Waqqas, a skilled warrior and leader, and Zubair ibn al-Awwam, Muhammad's cousin known for his bravery. Each conversion was like a candle lit in the darkness, slowly illuminating the truth for others to see. The early believers met secretly in the house of Al-Arqam, tucked away from the prying eyes of the Quraysh elite. There, in hushed voices, they would listen as Muhammad recited the verses that continued to descend from heaven. The words possessed a beauty and power that moved even the hardest hearts to tears. They spoke of one creator, of human dignity, of justice for the oppressed, of life beyond death, and of accountability for all deeds. These early Muslims came from every level of society, wealthy merchants and freed slaves, young men and elderly women, members of powerful tribes and those without protection. What united them was not blood or wealth, but recognition of truth. They had heard the Qur'an and knew it could not be the product of human imagination. Its linguistic perfection, its profound wisdom, and its transformative power convinced them that they were witnessing something divine. Bilal ibn Rabah, an Abyssinian slave with a voice of startling beauty, would later become Islam's first muezzin. His master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, would torture him mercilessly for his faith, dragging him over burning sand with a heavy stone on his chest. Yet Bilal would only cry out, "Ahad, one, refusing to renounce his belief even unto death. Sumayya bint Khayyat, an elderly woman of humble origin, became Islam's first martyr when Abu Jahl pierced her with a spear for refusing to abandon her faith. Her dying words were a forgiveness for her tormentors, embodying the mercy that would characterize this new community. As the circle of believers grew, so did the whispers throughout Makkah. The Quraysh began to notice that something was stirring beneath the surface of their city. Slaves were speaking of dignity, the poor of justice, and youth of a higher purpose than tribal glory. The old order sensed a challenge rising, quiet but inexorable, like the tide that slowly but surely reshapes the shoreline. The secret phase was drawing to a close. Soon the call would echo from the hilltops of Makkah, and the real test would begin. The silence of secrecy could not last forever. After 3 years of quiet calling, when the foundations of faith had been laid in the hearts of the chosen few, the divine command descended with unmistakable clarity, and warn your closest kindred. The time had come for Muhammad to step from the shadows into the blazing light of public declaration. He gathered the clan of Banu Hashim at his home, preparing a simple meal of meat and milk. When they had eaten, he stood before them, his uncles, cousins and kinsmen who had known him since childhood. These were men who had witnessed his honesty, his integrity, his unwavering truthfulness. If anyone would listen, surely it would be his own blood. O sons of Abdul Muttalib, Muhammad began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to declare. I know of no Arab who has come to his people with a nobler message than mine. I have brought you the best of this world and the next. Allah has ordered me to call you to Him. So who will join me in this matter, and be my brother, my executor, and my successor? Silence stretched across the gathering like a held breath. These were proud men, leaders of their tribes, steeped in the traditions of their fathers. The weight of his words settled upon them slowly. Then, unexpectedly, young Ali rose to his feet. Though barely 13 years old, he declared without hesitation, O Prophet of Allah, I will be your helper in this matter. The older men burst into laughter, some slapping their knees in amusement. Here was Abu Talib's son pledging allegiance to Abu Talib's nephew in what seemed to them a child's game. But Muhammad looked upon Ali with profound seriousness and proclaimed, This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you. So listen to him and obey him. The laughter died, replaced by uncomfortable murmurs. Abu Lahab, Muhammad's own uncle, rose with fury burning in his eyes. May you be ruined for this, he spat. Did you gather us for this? His words would later be immortalized in Surah Al-Masad, where Allah declared, May the hands of Abu Lahab be ruined, and ruined is he. The family gathering dispersed in tension and bewilderment, but Muhammad's mission had only begun. Allah's next command came with even greater force. So proclaim openly what you are commanded and turn away from the polytheists. The time for family conferences had passed. Now he must address all of Makkah. Muhammad climbed Mount Safa, the rocky hill that overlooked the sacred valley where the Kaaba stood. From this elevated position, he could see the sprawling city below, the busy markets, the proud mansions of the wealthy, and the humble dwellings of the poor. This was the traditional place for making important announcements, where tribal leaders had called their people for generations. Ya Sabaha, he cried out, using the ancient call that summoned the tribes in times of danger. His voice echoed across the stone buildings and narrow streets. People began to emerge from their homes and shops, drawn by the urgency in his tone. Soon a crowd had gathered at the base of the hill, merchants pausing their trade, women peering from behind their veils, children running to see what caused such commotion. When he saw that representatives from every clan had assembled, Muhammad posed a question that would become legendary. O people of Quraysh, if I were to tell you that an enemy army was approaching from behind this hill, would you believe me? The response came as a unified murmur. Yes, we would believe you. We have never known you to lie. Even his enemies acknowledged his truthfulness. The title Allah, the trustworthy, was not merely courtesy but recognition of a lifetime of honesty. Then I warn you, Muhammad declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, of a severe punishment that awaits you. I call you to testify that there is no God but Allah, and that I am his messenger. Save yourselves from the fire whose fuel is men and stones. The words fell upon the gathering like thunder in a clear sky. For a moment stunned silence reigned. Then the crowd erupted in chaos. Some turned away in disgust. Others shouted accusations of madness. Still others stood transfixed by the power of his declaration. The comfortable order of their world had been challenged by one of their own. Abu Lahab's voice rose above the tumult, his face twisted with rage. May you be ruined. Is this why you gathered us? His public rejection would be answered by divine revelation, but the damage to family unity was immediate and irreversible. The Quraysh elite quickly recognized the threat to their power. Their authority rested on tradition, on the worship of gods their fathers had served, on the profitable pilgrimage trade that brought wealth from across Arabia. If Muhammad's message spread, their entire system would crumble. The Kaaba housed 360 idols, each representing different tribes and interests. Unity meant prosperity, and Muhammad's call to monotheism threatened to shatter that profitable diversity. The mockery began immediately. Poets composed verses ridiculing Muhammad as a madman possessed by jinn. They called him a sorcerer who split families with his enchantments, a liar who claimed to receive messages from heaven. The word Majnun, madman, followed him through the streets, whispered by children and shouted by his enemies. Yet the more they opposed him, the more people began to listen. The Qur'an's beauty could not be denied, even by his harshest critics. When the verses were recited in the sanctuary of the Kaaba, hardened warriors would weep despite themselves. The message spoke to something deep within the human soul, the longing for justice, for meaning, for connection with the divine. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the defenders of tradition, privilege, and the old ways. On the other, a growing band of believers who had tasted truth and could never return to falsehood. The public declaration had shattered the peace of Makkah forever, but it had also lit a fire that would spread far beyond the borders of Arabia. The rain continues to fall, each drop carrying the echo of that momentous day when truth first challenged power in the heart of the sacred city. What began as mockery soon transformed into something far more sinister. The Quraysh leaders, realizing that ridicule only strengthened the resolve of the believers, turned to harsher methods. They had initially dismissed Muhammad as a harmless dreamer, but the steady growth of his following alarmed them. Islam was attracting not just the poor and powerless, but members of respected families, successful merchants, and even some from their own ranks. The persecution began with social pressure. Families disowned sons who embraced Islam. Fathers cast out daughters who refused to abandon their faith. Business partnerships dissolved overnight when one partner converted. The entire fabric of Meccan society, built on tribal loyalty and ancestral tradition, began to fray as this new allegiance transcended bloodlines and ancient bonds. For the slaves and the vulnerable, the torment became physical. Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian slave whose voice would one day call the faithful to prayer, endured torture that would have broken lesser men. His master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, would drag him onto the burning sands at noon when the sun blazed mercilessly overhead. A massive stone was placed upon Bilal's chest as he lay spread-eagled under the scorching heat, his tormentors demanding he renounce his faith and return to worshipping their idols. But Bilal's response never wavered. Through cracked lips and burning throat, he would gasp Ahad, Ahad, one. His declaration of Allah's unity echoed across the desert like a battle cry that no amount of suffering could silence. Abu Bakr, witnessing this daily torment, eventually purchased Bilal's freedom, but the memory of his steadfastness under torture became a source of inspiration for generations of believers. The family of Yasser faced even crueler persecution. Yasser, his wife Sumayya, and their son Ammar were tortured together in the blazing heat. Abu Jahl, one of Islam's most vicious opponents, would personally oversee their punishment. When Sumayya refused to renounce her faith despite the agony, Abu Jahl thrust a spear into her, making her Islam's first martyr. Her death sent shockwaves through the believing community, but it also demonstrated the price they were willing to pay for truth. Muhammad himself was not spared from harassment. Abu Lahab's wife, Jamil, would scatter thorns in his path as he walked to prayer. Children, taught by their parents to hate him, threw stones and dust. Once, while he prostrated in prayer near the Kaaba, his enemies placed the bloody entrails of a slaughtered camel upon his back, laughing as he remained motionless in submission to Allah. Only when his daughter Fatima arrived and removed the filth did he rise, tears in his eyes, not from his own humiliation, but from grief at his people's blindness. The economic boycott represented their most calculated cruelty. The Quraysh leaders crafted a formal pact, sealed and hung inside the Kaaba itself, declaring that no one should marry from the clan of Banu Hashim, trade with them, or show them any kindness. The entire extended family of Muhammad, believers and non-believers alike, was to be starved into submission. For 3 agonizing years they were confined to a narrow valley outside Makkah called Shib Talib. The rocky gorge became their prison, surrounded by enemies who watched to ensure no food or supplies reached them. During the harshest months, the cries of hungry children echoed off the canyon walls. Mothers pressed their infants to dry breasts, helpless to provide nourishment. The believers survived on leaves, roots, and whatever scraps kind-hearted people could smuggle past the blockade. Abu Talib, though he never embraced Islam, stood firm in protecting his nephew. When delegations from the Quraysh came demanding he surrender Muhammad, the old chief's response was unwavering: "By Allah, I will never hand him over to you until I die." His loyalty cost him dearly, for he too suffered the hunger and deprivation of the boycott, yet his honor would not permit him to abandon his kinsmen. During those dark years in the valley, the revelations continued to descend, offering comfort and strength to the suffering community. The Qur'an spoke of previous prophets who had endured similar trials, reminding the believers that persecution was the price of bearing witness to truth. Do you think you will enter paradise without being tested like those before you? They were afflicted with poverty and hardship, and were shaken until the messenger and those who believed with him said, "When will Allah's help come?" Indeed, Allah's help is near. The boycott finally ended when several Quraysh leaders, troubled by the suffering of innocent children, discovered that termites had devoured the parchment containing their cruel pact, leaving only the words "In your name, O Allah." It was as if heaven itself had declared the boycott void. The believers emerged from their valley prison, thin and worn but unbroken in spirit. Yet freedom from the boycott brought new sorrows. Abu Talib, weakened by years of hardship, fell gravely ill. Muhammad sat by his uncle's bedside, pleading with him to embrace Islam so they might be reunited in paradise. But the old man, loyal to the traditions of his fathers unto death, could not take that final step. His last words were upon the religion of Abd al-Muttalib, not upon Islam. His death left Muhammad exposed to his enemies as never before. Even more devastating was the loss of Khadijah, the woman who had been his anchor through every storm. The years of exile had taken their toll on her aging body, and she too succumbed to illness. As Muhammad held her hand in her final moments, she whispered words of love and faith that would comfort him through the trials ahead. With her passing, he lost not only his beloved companion, but his greatest source of emotional support. The year became known as Am ul-Huzn, the year of sorrow. In the span of a few months, Muhammad had lost both his protector and his comfort, leaving him more vulnerable than ever to the hatred of his enemies. The persecution intensified as the Quraysh realized that the barriers which had long restrained them were now gone. Through all these trials, the believers learned that faith was not a shield against suffering, but a source of strength within it. Each test deepened their conviction, each hardship purified their hearts, and each moment of pain became a step closer to the ultimate victory that Allah had promised. The rain falls harder now, as if the heavens weep for those early martyrs whose blood watered the seeds of faith in the harsh soil of opposition. In the depths of his sorrow, when the weight of loss pressed upon Muhammad's heart like the stones his enemies had once placed upon Bilal's chest, Allah granted him a miracle that would transcend the boundaries of time and space. It was a year after the deaths of Khadijah and Abu Talib, when loneliness had become his constant companion and the persecution had reached new heights of cruelty. On a night when the stars seemed to shine with unusual brilliance over the sleeping city of Makkah, Muhammad lay resting near the Kaaba in the home of his cousin Hani. The sacred precinct was quiet, the pilgrims and merchants having retired for the evening. In this stillness, as the Prophet's weary soul sought comfort in prayer, the heavens prepared to unveil one of their greatest mysteries. The angel Jibril appeared in his magnificent form, accompanied by a creature unlike anything in the earthly realm. This was Al-Buraq, a winged mount of dazzling white, larger than a donkey yet smaller than a mule, whose very step could reach the horizon. The creature's name meant lightning, for it moved with speed that defied human comprehension, carrying prophets across vast distances in the blink of an eye. "Rise, O Muhammad," Jibril commanded, "for tonight you shall journey as no man has journeyed before." With a heart filled with wonder and submission to Allah's will, the Prophet mounted Al-Buraq. In an instant that stretched beyond the confines of time, they soared through the night sky, racing over the hills and valleys of Arabia, across the Sinai Peninsula, until they reached the sacred city of Jerusalem. There, at the site known as Al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, Muhammad dismounted and found assembled before him the spirits of all the prophets who had come before. Ibrahim, the friend of Allah, stood with the dignity of one who had built the Kaaba with his own hands. Musa, the one who spoke with Allah on Mount Sinai, radiated the authority of the Torah. Isa, the word of Allah and spirit from him, bore the gentle light of the Injil. All the messengers of Allah throughout history had gathered to welcome the final prophet to their eternal brotherhood. Muhammad led them in prayer, serving as imam to this blessed congregation. In that moment, the continuity of divine revelation was made manifest, from Adam through Noah, from Ibrahim through Musa and Isa. The message had remained constant: worship Allah alone, establish justice, and prepare for the return to the Creator. The Prophet was not bringing something new, but completing and perfecting what had always been true. But the night's wonders had only begun. From Jerusalem, Jibril led Muhammad higher still, ascending through the seven heavens in a journey that would forever transform human understanding of the divine realm. At each level of paradise, they encountered one of the great prophets, each dwelling in a station befitting his rank and service to Allah. In the first heaven, Adam, the father of humanity, greeted Muhammad with joy and recognition. "Welcome, righteous son and righteous prophet," he said, his face bearing both the wisdom of ages and the sorrow of one who had witnessed his children's struggles throughout history. In the second heaven, the cousins Yahya and Isa, John the Baptist, and Jesus welcomed him with the warmth of kinship. Their presence together spoke of the unity between the revelations, the common thread that connected all divine messages across time and culture. The third heaven held Yusuf, whose beauty of character had been tested in the depths of hardship and elevated to the heights of honor. The fourth welcomed Idris, the prophet who had been raised to a high station. In the fifth, Harun stood in priestly dignity, and in the sixth, Musa greeted Muhammad with such emotion that tears flowed from his eyes. "Why do you weep, O Musa?" the angels asked. The great lawgiver replied, "I weep because the followers of this young man shall enter paradise in greater numbers than my own followers." His tears were not of jealousy, but of joy, recognizing in Muhammad the fulfillment of prophecies he had long awaited. In the seventh and highest heaven, Ibrahim sat beneath the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the oak tree of the utmost boundary, beyond which no created being could pass. This blessed tree marked the limit of the known universe, its leaves like elephant ears, its fruits like enormous vessels, constantly transformed by divine light into forms of indescribable beauty. Here even Jibril reached his limit. "If I were to advance a single step further," the mighty archangel confessed, I would be burned to ashes. Muhammad continued alone into the divine presence, ascending to a realm where words fail and human understanding dissolves into pure submission. In that ineffable encounter beyond the lote tree, Allah spoke to his messenger in ways that transcend description. There the 5 daily prayers were ordained, originally 50, but reduced through Muhammad's humble intercession, until they became 5 with the reward of 50. This divine conversation established the direct connection between Creator and creation that would bless the believers until the end of time. The return journey unfolded in reverse, each heaven bidding farewell to the traveler who had ventured where none before him could go. Jerusalem received him once more. Then Al-Barak carried him back across the desert night to Makkah, where he found his bed still warm from his departure. When morning came and Muhammad related his experience, the city erupted in ridicule and disbelief. You claim to have traveled to Jerusalem and back in a single night, they mocked. Our caravans take weeks for such a journey. Some who had wavered in their faith departed entirely, unable to accept what seemed impossible to human reason. But Abu Bakr, when told of the night journey, responded without hesitation, "If he said it, then it is true." From that day forward, he bore the title Siddiq full one for his unwavering faith in the Prophet's words. The Isra and Miraj, the night journey, and ascension became more than miraculous travel. It was Allah's gift to his messenger in his darkest hour, a reminder that while the earth below might be filled with enemies and sorrow, the heavens remained open to those who served the divine will. It was preparation for the trials ahead, a glimpse of the eternal reality that made temporary suffering bearable. The rain continues its gentle rhythm, each drop carrying the echo of that sacred night when the boundaries between heaven and earth dissolved, and a man touched the infinite before returning to guide humanity toward the light. The persecution in Makkah had reached unbearable levels. With Abu Talib's protection gone and the Quraysh growing bolder in their attacks, Muhammad began seeking refuge beyond the borders of his birthplace. The city that had once been home now felt like a prison, its streets filled with enemies who watched his every move, waiting for an opportunity to silence him forever. His first attempt to find sanctuary led him to the mountain city of Taif, about 60 miles southeast of Makkah. The journey on foot through the rocky terrain took several days, accompanied only by his freed slave Zayd ibn Haritha. Taif was home to the Thaqif tribe, wealthy from their fertile lands and strategic location along the trade routes. Perhaps Muhammad hoped they would prove more receptive to his message than the stubborn Quraysh, but Taif brought only deeper humiliation. The tribal leaders not only rejected his call but ordered their slaves and children to chase him from the city, pelting him with stones until his sandals filled with blood. As he stumbled beyond the city walls, wounded and exhausted, Muhammad sought shelter in a vineyard belonging to 2 Meccan merchants. There, beneath the shade of grapevines, he raised his hands in one of the most poignant prayers ever recorded. "O Allah, to you I complain of my weakness, my lack of resources, and my humiliation before the people. You are the Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord. To whom do you leave me? To a distant person who receives me with hostility, or to an enemy whom you have given power over me? If you are not displeased with me, then I do not care what I face." His prayer was answered in an unexpected way. A Christian slave named Adas brought him grapes, and when Muhammad mentioned the name of Allah, Adas recognized something familiar. "You speak like the prophets," the slave whispered, kissing Muhammad's hands before his masters could see. In that moment of kindness from a stranger, the prophet found comfort that his own people had denied him. The return journey to Makkah required careful negotiation. Without Abu Talib's protection, Muhammad could not simply walk back into the city. He sent word to several tribal leaders, seeking their safeguard. Finally, Mutim ibn Adi, though not a believer, granted him protection out of respect for traditional Arab hospitality. Muhammad entered Makkah under Mutine's shield, but his position remained precarious. It was during the annual pilgrimage season, when tribes from across Arabia converged on Makkah, that Muhammad's persistence in seeking allies beyond his city finally bore fruit. Each year he would visit the camps of visiting tribes, sharing his message with anyone willing to listen. Most rejected him, some with politeness, others with hostility, but he continued his efforts with unwavering determination. Then came the delegation from Yathrib, a city 300 miles to the north, that would later become known as Medina. Unlike Mecca, Yathrib was an agricultural oasis marked by chronic tribal warfare between the Arab clans of Aus and Khazraj. These conflicts had raged for generations, staining the city's palm groves with blood and keeping its people in a state of exhaustion and despair. The men from Yathrib had heard whispers of a prophet from the Jewish tribes who lived among them. The Jews often spoke of an expected messenger who would lead them to victory over their Arab neighbors. When these 6 men from the Khazraj tribe encountered Muhammad during their pilgrimage, something stirred in their hearts. His message of unity, justice and submission to one God resonated with souls weary of endless conflict. That first meeting at Aqaba, a secluded valley near Makkah, was brief but transformative. The 6 men embraced Islam and returned to Yathrib, carrying more than trade goods. They carried hope. Over the following months, they shared Muhammad's teachings with their families and neighbors, preparing the ground for something unprecedented in Arabian history. The next year, 12 men from Yathrib returned to meet Muhammad at the same location. This time they came not merely as interested listeners but as committed believers ready to pledge their allegiance. In what became known as the First Pledge of Aqaba, they swore to worship Allah alone, to avoid theft, adultery and infanticide, to speak truthfully, and to obey Muhammad in all that was righteous. The Prophet sent Mus'ab ibn Umayr, a young nobleman who had abandoned luxury for faith, to Yathrib as a teacher and organizer. Mus'ab's gentle wisdom and deep knowledge of Islam won hearts throughout the city. He led prayers in homes and courtyards, recited the Qur'an in gardens and markets, and gradually wove the separate threads of Yathrib's divided society into a unified community of believers. The transformation was remarkable. Ancient enemies began praying side by side. Blood feuds were set aside in favor of brotherhood in faith. The message that had struggled to find acceptance in cosmopolitan Makkah flourished in the agricultural setting of Yathrib, where people's connection to the earth made them more receptive to submission to the Creator. By the following pilgrimage season, the delegation from Yathrib had grown to 73 men and 2 women. They met Muhammad again at Aqaba, but this time their pledge carried the weight of military alliance. They promised not only to practice Islam, but to defend the Prophet as they would defend their own families. They invited him to make Yathrib his home, promising him protection and support. The second pledge of Aqaba marked a turning point in Islamic history. For the first time, Muhammad had found a community ready to accept not just his message but his leadership. The prospect of leaving Makkah, the city of his birth and the location of Islam's holiest shrine, filled him with sadness. But the opportunity to establish a society based on divine guidance, free from the corruption and oppression of Quraysh rule, beckoned like dawn after the longest night. As news of these negotiations filtered back to the Quraysh leadership, their alarm grew. The prospect of Muhammad establishing a power base outside their control, allied with the strong tribes of Yathrib, threatened everything they had worked to preserve. Their persecution intensified, but it was too late to stop what had been set in motion. Muhammad began authorizing his followers to emigrate to Yathrib in small groups, quietly slipping away from Makkah to begin new lives in the welcoming oasis. Each departure left the remaining believers more vulnerable, but also more determined. They knew that soon their prophet would join and with his arrival, a new chapter in the story of Islam would begin. The rain falls steadily now, washing the ancient stones of both cities, carrying the dust of ages and the dreams of those who dared to believe that the world could be transformed by truth, justice and unwavering faith in the divine will. The streets of Makkah had grown treacherous for the remaining believers. As more Muslims quietly departed for the safety of Yathrib, the Quraysh realized that their opportunity to crush the movement was slipping away. What had begun as religious disagreement had evolved into an existential threat to their power. If Muhammad established himself in Yathrib with the protection of the Aus and Khazraj tribes, he could potentially return at the head of an army to challenge their authority over the sacred city. In the meeting halls of Dar and Nadwa, the Quraysh leaders convened their most crucial council. Abu Jahl, with his characteristic ruthlessness, presented the stark reality. Muhammad grows stronger each day while we grow weaker. His followers have found sanctuary in Yathrib, and soon he will join them. We must act now, before it is too late. The debate raged through the night. Some proposed exile, others imprisonment, but these solutions left Muhammad alive to potentially return. Finally, Abu Jahl presented the most terrible option, assassination, but not by a single hand, for that would invite blood vengeance from Banu Hashim. Instead, they would select a strong young man from each major clan to strike simultaneously, spreading the blood guilt so widely that no single tribe could be held responsible. The decision was made in darkness, sealed with oaths that bound the conspirators to their murderous purpose. They would surround Muhammad's house at dawn and kill him as he emerged for the morning prayer. The plot seemed foolproof. Yet they had forgotten that Allah sees all things, and His protection extends over those who serve His cause. Divine revelation came to Muhammad, warning him of the conspiracy and commanding him to leave Makkah that very night. But this departure would not be the desperate flight of a fugitive, it would be the Hijra, the migration that would mark the beginning of the Islamic calendar and transform both the Prophet's mission and the course of human history. Muhammad's preparations were swift but careful. He instructed his beloved cousin Ali to sleep in his bed, covered by the familiar green cloak, creating the illusion that the Prophet still rested within. Ali, barely 20 years old, accepted this dangerous deception without question, knowing full well that discovery might mean death at the hands of the assassins. Under cover of darkness, Muhammad slipped from his house through a back entrance, unseen by the armed men who had already taken their positions around the building. He made his way through the narrow alleys to the home of Abu Bakr, his closest companion, who had long been prepared for this moment. Together they gathered their modest supplies, water, dates, and the certainty that Allah would guide their steps. Rather than taking the direct northern route to Yathrib, which their pursuers would expect, they headed south toward the rugged mountains. Their destination was a cave in Mount Thar, where they could hide until the initial fury of the search had passed. The 3-mile journey through rocky terrain tested their endurance, but they pressed on, guided by starlight and unwavering faith. The cave of Thar became their sanctuary for 3 perilous days. Outside, the Quraysh search parties scoured the desert with a fury born of desperation. They offered enormous rewards, 100 camels for Muhammad's capture, dead or alive, enough wealth to make any Bedouin abandon all loyalty. The mountains echoed with the sounds of galloping horses and shouting men as the net tightened around their hiding place. On the most dangerous day, a search party climbed Mount Thar itself, their voices growing closer as they investigated every crevice and shadow. Abu Bakr's heart pounded as footsteps approached their cave entrance. If one of them simply looks down at his feet, he will see us, he whispered to the Prophet, fear evident in his voice despite his courage. Muhammad's response revealed the depth of his trust in divine protection. What do you think of 2 people when Allah is the third with them? Do not grieve. Indeed, Allah is with us. His calm certainty flowed into Abu Bakr's heart like cool water, replacing anxiety with the peace that comes from complete submission to Allah's will. The searchers stood directly above the cave entrance, so close that their words could be heard clearly. Yet they did not look down. Allah had woven His protection around His messenger in ways both subtle and profound. A spider had spun her web across the cave mouth, and a dove had built her nest nearby with eggs visible within. The pursuers, seeing these undisturbed signs of nature, concluded that the cave had been empty for weeks. They turned away, never knowing how close they had come to their quarry. After 3 days, when the initial fury of the search had subsided, the journey to Yathrib began in earnest. Abdullah ibn Urakit, a skilled guide who knew every hidden path through the desert despite not being a Muslim, led them along routes that avoided the main caravan tracks. The Prophet had chosen him for his expertise and integrity, demonstrating the Islamic principle that excellence of character transcends religious differences. The journey tested them in ways beyond physical endurance. The desert heat was merciless during the day, the cold bitter at night. Water was precious, shade almost non-existent. Yet they pressed forward, sustained by the knowledge that each step carried them closer to a place where Islam could flourish without persecution. One incident along the way revealed the extraordinary nature of their journey. Surah ibn Malik, a renowned tracker and warrior, had heard of the reward and set out to claim it. He followed their trail with the persistence of a hunting wolf, gradually closing the distance between them. But each time he drew near enough to attack, his horse would stumble and sink into the sand as if held by invisible hands. After the third such incident, Surah understood that divine protection surrounded these travelers. He called out for mercy, and when Muhammad granted it, the warrior experienced something that would change his life forever. The Prophet spoke of a future when Surah would wear the golden bracelets of the Persian Emperor Khosrow Mirza, a prophecy that seemed impossible but would prove true decades later. As they crested the final ridge before Yathrib, the oasis spread below them like a green jewel set in golden sand. Date palms swayed in the breeze, irrigation channels caught the sunlight, and the white houses of the city seemed to beckon with the promise of safety and new beginnings. Word of their approach had already reached the inhabitants, and crowds were gathering on the outskirts to welcome the Prophet they had invited to be their leader. The Hijra was complete, but it was far more than a journey from one city to another. It represented the transformation of Islam from a persecuted minority faith into the foundation of a new society. In Yathrib, soon to be renamed Madinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, the revelations would find fertile ground to take root and flourish. The rain continues its gentle blessing, each drop carrying the memory of that epic journey when two men, guided by divine will and sustained by unwavering faith, walked from the darkness of persecution into the light of a new dawn that would illuminate the world. The arrival of Muhammad in Yathrib marked the beginning of one of history's most remarkable social transformations. The oasis city that had been torn apart by generations of tribal warfare between the Aws and Khazraj clans now faced the challenge of becoming something entirely new, a unified community bound not by blood or tradition, but by shared principles of justice and divine guidance. The Prophet's first act upon arrival was deeply symbolic. As his camel, Al-Qaswa, wandered through the streets of the city, various tribal leaders called out invitations for him to stay in their quarters, each hoping to gain the honor and influence of hosting the messenger of Allah. But Muhammad had made a profound declaration: "Let her go her way, for she is under Allah's command." The camel eventually knelt in an empty lot used for drying dates, owned by two young orphans, Sol and Suhail. This seemingly random choice proved to be divinely guided, for the location would become the site of the first mosque, Masjid an-Nabawi, the Prophet's Mosque. Muhammad purchased the land from the orphans, ensuring they received fair compensation, and immediately began construction of a simple but revolutionary structure. The mosque was more than a place of worship, it became the heart of the new community. Built with the Prophet's own hands alongside his companions, it consisted of a large courtyard, surrounded by walls of palm trunks and mud brick, with a roof of palm fronds that provided modest shelter. On one side were simple chambers where Muhammad would live with his family, demonstrating that in Islam, there was no separation between the sacred and the everyday, between worship and governance. But the physical construction of the mosque was nothing compared to the monumental task of building unity among the diverse groups that now comprised Medina's population. The city housed the Muhajirin, the emigrants from Makkah who had sacrificed everything for their faith, alongside the Ansar, the local helpers who had invited them. There were also several Jewish tribes who had lived in the oasis for generations, various Arab clans with their own customs and loyalties, and smaller groups of different origins and beliefs. The challenge was staggering. How could such disparate groups with their different languages, customs, economic interests and religious practices be welded into a functioning society? The traditional Arab solution had been the dominance of the strongest tribe, but Muhammad's vision was radically different. He sought to create a community based on justice and mutual responsibility, where strength came not from tribal affiliation, but from moral character and divine guidance. The answer came in the form of a document that would later be recognized as one of history's first written constitutions, the Constitution of Medina. This remarkable charter, revealed through divine inspiration and crafted with extraordinary wisdom, established the framework for a pluralistic society that honored diversity while maintaining unity of purpose. The Constitution began with a fundamental declaration. This is a document from Muhammad the Prophet, governing the relations between the believers and Muslims of Quraysh and Yathrib, and those who followed them, and are attached to them and struggle alongside them. It established that all inhabitants of Medina, regardless of their tribal origin or religious affiliation, were part of a single ummah, a nation or community. For the Muslim population, both immigrants and local converts, the document established clear principles. The Muhajirin and Ansar were declared to be brothers, with obligations to support each other that transcended their original tribal loyalties. Blood feuds and revenge killings, the scourge of pre-Islamic Arabia, were replaced by a system of collective responsibility and judicial process. No believer could kill another believer for an unbeliever, and any dispute between Muslims must be referred to Allah and His Messenger for resolution. The economic provisions were equally revolutionary. The Constitution established that all believers were responsible for each other's welfare. If a member of the community was captured by enemies, the entire Ummah was obligated to pool resources for his ransom. Debts and financial obligations were collective responsibilities, ensuring that no individual would face ruin alone. This system of mutual aid created a social safety net that was unprecedented in Arabian society. Perhaps most remarkably, the Constitution extended protection and rights to the Jewish tribes of Medina. The document explicitly stated, the Jews of Banu Auf are one community with the believers. The Jews have their religion, and the Muslims have theirs. This principle of religious autonomy was extended to all the Jewish clans, Banu Najjar, Banu Harith, Banu Saida, and others, guaranteeing their freedom to practice their faith, while requiring them to contribute to the common defense and welfare of the city. The Constitution established Muhammad not as a king or dictator, but as the final arbiter of disputes and the military commander in times of conflict. His authority derived not from inherited power or tribal strength, but from his role as Allah's messenger and the community's voluntary acceptance of his leadership. This represented a fundamental shift from the tribal democracy of pre-Islamic Arabia to a new form of governance based on divine guidance and prophetic wisdom. The practical implementation of these principles required delicate diplomacy and constant attention to justice. When disputes arose between different groups, Muhammad would listen to all parties with patience and render decisions based on Quranic principles and divine inspiration. His judgments were marked by fairness that transcended personal relationships or tribal loyalties, earning him respect even from those who did not share his faith. The Constitution also addressed the crucial issue of external relations. All inhabitants of Medina were bound to defend the city against outside attackers, regardless of their religion or tribal origin. Separate peace treaties with enemies were forbidden, so as the community must stand or fall together. This provision would prove crucial in the years ahead, as the Quraysh and their allies sought to destroy the new society that threatened their traditional dominance. One of the most significant aspects of the new order was the gradual transformation of social relationships. The artificial barriers between Arab and non-Arab, noble and common, began to dissolve as the Quran repeatedly emphasized that honor in Allah's sight came not from lineage but from righteousness. Bilal, the former Abyssinian slave, would soon call the faithful to prayer from the roof of the mosque, his beautiful voice reaching the ears of Arab aristocrats who had once scorned him. The Constitution of Medina established principles that would echo through history: religious freedom, collective responsibility, rule of law, and governance by consent rather than force. It created a template for Islamic civilization that would later encompass territories from Spain to Central Asia, adapting to local conditions while maintaining core principles of justice and human dignity. As the rain continues to fall, washing the ancient stones of Medina, we can imagine those early days when former enemies learned to live as brothers, when the marketplace heard prayers in multiple languages, and when a community was born that would change the world not through conquest, but through the power of its example. The Constitution was more than a legal document. It was a covenant with the divine, and a promise to humanity that societies could be built on foundations of mercy, justice, and truth. The peaceful establishment of Medina could not long remain undisturbed. The Quraysh, having failed to eliminate Muhammad in Makkah, now faced the reality of his growing power in a city that welcomed him as both spiritual guide and political leader. The emigrants who had fled Makkah carried with them not only their faith, but also the memory of confiscated properties, broken contracts, and years of persecution. The stage was set for confrontation that would test the resolve of the young Muslim community. The first tensions arose not from grand military campaigns but from the practical realities of survival. The Muhajirun had arrived in Medina with little more than their faith and the clothes on their backs. Their properties in Makkah had been seized by the Quraysh, their businesses dissolved, their trade partnerships broken, while the Ansar had welcomed them with remarkable generosity, sharing homes, food, and resources. The emigrants yearned for economic independence and the chance to support their families with dignity. The solution came through divine guidance that would reshape the Arabian Peninsula's economic and political landscape. Allah revealed that the Muslims had the right to intercept Quraysh trade caravans, not merely for material gain, but as recompense for what had been stolen from them and as a means of pressuring their oppressors. These caravans, laden with goods from Syria and Palestine, represented the lifeblood of Makkah's economy and the source of the Quraysh's power. The first significant expedition occurred when word reached Medina of a wealthy caravan returning from Syria under the leadership of Abu Sufyan, Muhammad's longtime adversary, who had not yet embraced Islam. The caravan carried goods worth 50,000 dinars, an enormous fortune that could transform the economic situation of the Muslim community. Muhammad called for volunteers to intercept this caravan, and 314 men responded, a mix of Muhajirun and Ansar united in their determination to challenge Quraysh dominance. But Abu Sufyan proved to be a cunning opponent. Sensing danger as his caravan approached the traditional route near Medina, he sent urgent messages to Makkah calling for military support and skillfully maneuvered his valuable cargo along the coastal road, avoiding confrontation. His desperate plea for help reached the Quraysh leadership, who saw in this crisis an opportunity to crush the Muslim community once and for all. The response from Makkah was overwhelming. Nearly 1,000 warriors marched north, led by the most prominent chiefs of Quraysh. They came not merely to protect a caravan but to end what they saw as the Muhammad problem permanently. Abu Jahl, the Prophet's bitter enemy, declared openly that they would not return to Makkah until they had feasted at Badr, demonstrated their power before all the Arab tribes, and eliminated the threat to their authority. When news reached Muhammad that an army, not just a caravan, was approaching, the situation transformed completely. This was no longer a raid for economic recovery, but a battle for the survival of Islam itself. The Prophet gathered his companions near the wells of Badr, a location that would forever be etched in Islamic memory, and addressed the gravity of their situation. The disparity in forces was stark and daunting. The Muslim army of 314 faced nearly 1,000 seasoned warriors. The Quraysh army boasted 100 horses and countless camels, while the Muslims had only 2 horses and 70 camels between them. Many of the believers had joined expecting a caravan raid, not a life or death battle against overwhelming odds. In this moment of supreme crisis, Muhammad demonstrated the leadership that would define his prophetic mission. He consulted extensively with his companions, particularly seeking the counsel of the Ansar, whose commitment to defend him had been pledged at Aqaba. Sayyid ibn Muhammad, speaking for the Ansar, declared with passionate conviction, "O Prophet of Allah, we believe in you and bear witness that what you have brought is the truth. We have given you our pledge to hear and obey. So go where you wish, connect with whom you will, sever relations with whom you will, take from our wealth what you will, and we will be with you. If you were to cross the sea, we would cross it with you." The night before battle, Muhammad spent long hours in prayer, prostrating himself before Allah and pleading for divine assistance. His supplications, witnessed by Abu Bakr, revealed the depth of his concern not for personal safety but for the future of Islam itself. "O Allah," he cried with tears streaming down his face, "if this small band is destroyed today, there will be none left on earth to worship you as you deserve to be worshipped." As dawn broke over the valley of Badr, both armies prepared for combat according to the ancient Arabian traditions. The battle began with individual challenges, where champions from each side would meet in single combat before the general engagement commenced. The Quraysh sent forth 3 of their most renowned warriors, Utbah ibn Rabi'a, his brother Shayba, and his son al-Walid, men whose names struck fear throughout Arabia. The Muslim response revealed the transformation that faith had worked in human hearts. Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle known as the Lion of Allah, stepped forward alongside Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith. These 3 men, bound by blood to Muhammad and strengthened by absolute conviction in their cause, faced the Quraysh champions with courage that seemed to transcend mortal limitations. The single combats ended in decisive Muslim victory, a powerful omen that spread through both armies. But the real test came when the general battle commenced. The Quraysh, despite their numerical superiority and superior equipment, found themselves facing an enemy whose motivation transcended ordinary warfare. The Muslims fought not for tribal honor or material gain, but for the truth they carried in their hearts and the Prophet they loved more than their own lives. The verses of Surah Muhammad would later commemorate this moment. "When you encounter those who disbelieve, strike at their necks. Then when you have routed them, bind them firmly. Then either release them by grace or by ransom until war lays down its burdens." But this divine guidance came with crucial qualifications. The violence was defensive, limited in scope, and always tempered by mercy once victory was achieved. The battle raged through the morning hours, but its outcome became apparent as the day progressed. The Quraysh army, despite its overwhelming advantages, began to crumble under the fierce determination of warriors who seemed to fight with supernatural strength. Abu Jahl himself fell, struck down while trying to rally his retreating forces. By noon the field belonged to the Muslims, their victory so complete that it stunned both armies. 70 of the Quraysh were killed, including many of their most prominent leaders, while the Muslims lost only 14 martyrs. The psychological impact was even greater than the military result. The aura of Quraysh invincibility, carefully cultivated over generations, lay shattered in the dust of Badr alongside their fallen champions. The treatment of prisoners after the battle revealed the character of the Prophet and the principles that would guide Islamic warfare. Despite having suffered years of persecution at Quraysh hands, Muhammad ordered that captives be treated with kindness and dignity. Those who could not pay ransom were offered their freedom in exchange for teaching literacy to Muslim children, transforming enemies into unwilling educators, and demonstrating that even in victory, the pursuit of knowledge remained paramount. The rain falls more gently now, as if the heavens themselves reflect on this pivotal moment when a small band of believers, outnumbered and outgunned, achieved victory through their absolute trust in divine guidance and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the truth they carried. Badr was more than a military engagement, it was divine vindication of Muhammad's mission and proof that Allah's promise to support those who support his cause would never be broken. The victory at Badr had transformed the balance of power in Arabia, but it also ensured that the conflict between Makkah and Medina would escalate beyond anything previously imagined. The Quraysh, humiliated by their defeat and stung by the loss of their most prominent leaders, began preparing for a war of revenge that would dwarf their previous efforts. The death of Abu Jahl and other chiefs demanded blood satisfaction according to the ancient codes of Arabian honor. For an entire year the Quraysh marshaled their resources and forged alliances throughout the peninsula. They sent envoys to nomadic tribes, promising rich rewards for military support. They invested their trade profits in weapons and armor, transforming their merchant caravan into a formidable military machine. The preparation was methodical and thorough, driven by a burning desire to erase the shame of Badr and restore their dominance over the sacred territories. When the Quraysh army finally marched north in the second year after the Hijra, it was a force unlike anything the Muslims had previously faced. 3,000 warriors, including 700 men in full armor and 200 mounted cavalry, moved across the desert like a storm cloud heavy with destruction. They were led by Abu Sufyan, whose tactical skills and deep knowledge of warfare complemented his personal motivation for revenge. The army's approach was detected by Muslim scouts while it was still a day's march from Medina. Muhammad immediately called for consultation with his companions, seeking their counsel on whether to defend the city from within its palm groves and fortified compounds or to march out and meet the enemy in open battle. The strategic situation was complex, with valid arguments supporting both approaches. The older companions, including Abu Bakr and others who remembered the defensive advantages that had served them well in previous conflicts, advocated for staying within Medina's familiar terrain. They argued that the city's narrow streets and thick vegetation would neutralize the Quraysh cavalry advantage and allow the Muslims to fight from prepared positions with secure supply lines. But many of the younger Muslims, particularly those who had not participated in Badr and burned with eagerness to prove their courage, pressed for aggressive action. They feared that remaining within the city would be seen as cowardice and might encourage other tribes to join the Quraysh coalition. Their arguments carried emotional weight, appealing to the martial pride that remained strong even among the believers. Muhammad initially inclined toward the defensive strategy, but when he saw the passionate determination of his younger followers, he chose to honor their wishes. This decision reflected his leadership style, which balanced divine guidance with consultation and consideration for his community's morale and unity. After the Friday prayer, he donned his armor and prepared to lead his force of approximately 1,000 men toward the enemy. The Muslim army took position on the slopes of Mount Uhud, a massive rocky outcropping that dominated the landscape north of Medina. The strategic position was well chosen, with the mountain protecting their rear and flanks while offering elevated ground for the initial engagement. Muhammad positioned 50 skilled archers on a hill overlooking the battlefield, giving them explicit and urgent instructions that would prove crucial to the day's outcome. "Guard our backs," the Prophet commanded the archers with unmistakable emphasis. "Do not leave your position under any circumstances. If you see us being slaughtered like sheep, do not come to help us. If you see us gaining victory and collecting spoils, do not join us. Your sole responsibility is to protect our rear from cavalry attack." The battle commenced at dawn with the traditional single combats that preceded major engagements. Talha ibn Abi Talha, the Quraysh champion known for his extraordinary size and strength, stepped forward issuing challenges to individual combat. Ali ibn Abi Talha answered the call, and their fierce duel ended with the giant's death, sending ripples of concern through the Quraysh ranks while boosting Muslim morale. As the general engagement began, the superior training and motivation of the Muslim infantry became apparent. The Quraysh front lines, despite their numerical advantage and better equipment, began to buckle under the disciplined assault of warriors who fought with the desperate courage of men defending their homes and faith. The tide of battle turned decisively in favor of the Muslims as enemy resistance crumbled. Khalid ibn al-Walid, commanding the Quraysh cavalry and not yet converted to Islam, watched with growing alarm as his army's center collapsed. A brilliant tactical mind who would later become known as Sayf Allah al-Maslul, the drawn sword of Allah, he recognized that conventional assault against the Muslim position was futile. Instead, he began probing for weaknesses, seeking an opportunity to exploit any gap in their defensive formation. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. As the Quraysh retreat accelerated and spoils of war began appearing on the battlefield, many of the archers positioned on the crucial hill abandoned their posts despite their explicit orders. The sight of their comrades collecting weapons, armor, and other valuable items proved too tempting to resist. "The battle is over," they reasoned. "Why should we miss our share of the victory?" Abdullah ibn Jubair, the commander of the archers, desperately tried to maintain discipline. "Remember the Prophet's command," he shouted above the noise of celebration. He specifically ordered us never to leave this position, but his appeals fell on deaf ears as 40 of his 50 men rushed down the hill to join in gathering the spoils of apparent victory. Khalid ibn al-Walid's experienced eye immediately recognized the tactical opportunity. The hill that had been securely defended by 50 determined archers was now held by only 10 men. Without hesitation, he led his cavalry in a swift flanking maneuver, overrunning the weakened position and falling upon the Muslim army from behind. The hunter had become the hunted in a matter of moments. The reversal was catastrophic and complete. The Muslim forces, caught between the reorganized Quraysh infantry and Khalid's cavalry assault from the rear, found themselves surrounded and confused. The ordered ranks dissolved into chaos as men struggled to understand how victory had so suddenly transformed into disaster. Panic began to spread through units that had been confidently advancing just moments before. In the confusion and swirling dust of the battlefield, rumors spread that Muhammad himself had been killed. The psychological impact was devastating, as many Muslims believed that their prophet's death meant the end of their cause and Allah's abandonment of their struggle. Some fled the field entirely, while others fought on with the desperation of men who believed they were witnessing the apocalypse. Muhammad had indeed been severely wounded in the fierce fighting that followed Khalid's surprise attack. A stone thrown by an enemy warrior had broken his tooth and gashed his face, while the weight of fallen bodies had pressed him into a pit where he lay bleeding and barely conscious. For terrifying moments it seemed as though the rumors of his death might become reality, but Allah's protection remained over his messenger. A small group of loyal companions, led by Ali ibn Abi Talib and Abu Bakr, formed a defensive circle around the Prophet's position and fought with superhuman determination to protect him. Gradually, as word spread that Muhammad still lived, the Muslim resistance began to reorganize around his position on the mountain slopes. The Battle of Uhud ended without decisive victory for either side. The Muslims had lost approximately 70 martyrs, including Hamza Abu Ubayd al-Muttalib, the Prophet's beloved uncle whose body was mutilated by Hind bint Utbah in revenge for her father's death at Badr. The Quraysh, despite their tactical success, had failed to achieve their strategic objective of crushing the Muslim community entirely. The aftermath of Uhud provided profound lessons that would be preserved in divine revelation. The Qur'an addressed the defeat with characteristic honesty, explaining that the reversal came as a consequence of disobedience and the pursuit of worldly gain over spiritual discipline. When you encountered the two armies, it was by Allah's permission, so He might know the believers and know those who are hypocrites. The battle also revealed the presence of munafiq and hypocrites within the Muslim ranks, individuals who had outwardly embraced Islam but whose commitment wavered when faced with serious trials. Abdullah Abu Ubay, a prominent leader who had expected to rule Medina before Muhammad's arrival, withdrew his 300 men from the battle just as it was beginning, claiming that the Prophet had ignored his counsel. As the rain continues to fall over the battlefield where so much blood was spilled and so many lessons learned, we reflect on the wisdom that emerged from apparent defeat. Uhud taught the Muslim community that victory comes not from human strength or numbers but from obedience to divine commands and trust in Allah's wisdom. It demonstrated that even prophets and righteous communities face trials that test their faith and refine their character. The battle's most enduring lesson echoed through the verses of Surah Muhammad: "O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger, and do not let your deeds go to waste." The archers who abandoned their positions had nullified their good deeds through a moment of disobedience, transforming certain victory into costly defeat and providing an eternal reminder that success in this world and the next depends upon unwavering adherence to divine guidance. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, as the date palms of Medina swayed in the spring breeze and the wounds of Uhud had healed into scars of wisdom, Muhammad experienced a dream that would lead to one of the most significant events in Islamic history. In his vision, he saw himself and his companions performing the pilgrimage to Makkah, circumambulating the Kaaba in peaceful worship, their heads shaved in the traditional manner of pilgrims completing the sacred rites. The dream carried the weight of divine revelation, for the visions of prophets are never mere products of sleep but windows into Allah's will. Muhammad announced to his community that they would journey to Makkah not as warriors but as pilgrims, carrying no weapons save the traveler's sword, wearing the simple white garments of ihram and seeking nothing more than the right to worship at the house that Ibrahim had built. The decision surprised many of the companions, who remembered the persecution they had suffered in Makkah and the battles they had fought against its people. To return unarmed to the city that had expelled them seemed to invite disaster. Yet 1,400 men volunteered to accompany the Prophet on this unprecedented pilgrimage, their trust in his judgment overcoming their natural apprehensions. The pilgrimage party set out from Medina in the sacred month of Dhul-Hijjah, when Arabian custom prohibited warfare and guaranteed safe passage for religious travelers. They brought with them 70 camels for sacrifice, the traditional offering that accompanied the completion of pilgrimage, and carried the peaceful intentions proclaimed by their simple clothing and lack of military equipment. But the Quraysh viewed this spiritual journey through the lens of political calculation. To them, Muhammad's return to Makkah, even as a pilgrim, would represent a victory that might encourage other tribes to challenge their authority. The sight of the man they had expelled now returning at the head of 1,400 followers would damage their prestige throughout Arabia and validate his claim to prophetic authority. When scouts brought word that the Muslim pilgrimage was approaching, the Quraysh mobilized their military forces and dispatched cavalry units to prevent the pilgrims from reaching the sacred city. Khalid ibn Walid, still fighting for Makkah before his eventual conversion, led 200 horsemen to block the traditional route and force a confrontation that would shatter the peaceful nature of the journey. Muhammad, informed of this military response through his own scouts, demonstrated the wisdom that characterized his leadership throughout these critical years. Rather than accepting battle or abandoning the pilgrimage, he ordered the caravan to take a different route through rocky terrain that would bypass the Quraysh cavalry. The pilgrims endured considerable hardship as their camels struggled through landscapes unsuited for large groups, but they maintained their peaceful intentions despite the provocation. The two forces eventually converged at Hudaybiyah, a barren plain on the edge of the sacred territory surrounding Makkah. Here, within sight of the city they longed to enter, the Muslim pilgrims made camp and awaited developments. The situation was unprecedented in Arabian history, an armed force prepared to prevent pilgrims from completing religious obligations that had been respected for centuries. Muhammad's response to this crisis revealed both his diplomatic skills and his unwavering commitment to peace whenever possible. Rather than treating the situation as grounds for war, he sent envoys to the Quraysh leadership proposing negotiations. His message was simple: the Muslims had come only to perform pilgrimage and would depart peacefully after completing their religious duties. The first envoy, Quraysh ibn Umayyah from the Khuzar tribe, was treated with disrespect and his camel's legs were cut, violating ancient Arabian customs regarding the sanctity of diplomatic messengers. The second envoy fared better, but the Quraysh response remained negative. They would not permit Muhammad and his followers to enter Makkah under any circumstances, viewing his presence as an unacceptable challenge to their authority. The situation reached a critical point when Muhammad sent Uthman ibn Affan as his third envoy. Uthman was chosen carefully as a member of the powerful Umayyad clan. He had family connections within Makkah that might facilitate productive negotiations. His mission was to assure the Quraysh of the pilgrims' peaceful intentions and secure permission for them to complete their religious obligations. But Uthman's diplomatic mission extended far longer than anticipated, and rumors began circulating through the Muslim camp that he had been killed by the Quraysh. The possibility that their envoy had been murdered in violation of all Arabian customs and Islamic principles created a crisis that threatened to transform the peaceful pilgrimage into a war of revenge. In this moment of supreme tension, Muhammad called his companions together beneath an acacia tree at Hudaybiyah. There, one by one, they pledged their loyalty unto death, swearing that they would stand with their prophet regardless of the consequences. This became known as Bayat al-Ridwan, the pledge of Allah's pleasure, and was later commemorated in the Qur'an. Allah was pleased with the believers when they pledged allegiance to you under the tree. The pledge transformed the spiritual atmosphere of the entire gathering. What had begun as concern over a possible diplomatic failure became a moment of profound religious experience as each believer renewed his commitment to the cause of Islam and to the Prophet who had guided them from darkness into light. The unity and determination displayed in that moment would be remembered as one of the defining characteristics of the early Muslim community. Fortunately, Uthman returned safely before any irreversible actions were taken, bringing with him the Quraysh proposal for a formal treaty that would address the complex political and religious issues raised by the pilgrimage attempt. The negotiations that followed would test Muhammad's wisdom and his companions' trust in ways that military conflict never could. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, as it came to be known, contained terms that initially appeared disappointing to many of the Muslim pilgrims. The Muslims would not be permitted to complete their pilgrimage that year, but could return the following year for a 3-day visit. A 10-year truce would suspend all hostilities between Makkah and Medina. Most controversially, any person who left Makkah to join the Muslims would be returned, while those who left Medina for Makkah would not be sent back. Many of the companions, including Umar ibn al-Khattab, expressed strong reservations about these terms. "Are we not upon the truth?" Umar asked the Prophet with passionate concern. "Are they not upon falsehood? Why should we accept humiliation in our religion?" The terms seemed to favor the Quraysh and deny the Muslims the religious rights they had traveled so far to exercise. But Muhammad's acceptance of the treaty reflected a wisdom that transcended immediate tactical considerations. The cessation of hostilities would allow Islam to spread through peaceful means rather than military conquest. Tribes throughout Arabia would have the opportunity to hear the Qur'an and observe the character of the Muslim community without the distraction of ongoing warfare. The treaty represented a victory of patience over aggression, of long-term strategic thinking over short-term emotional satisfaction. The wisdom of this approach became apparent almost immediately. During the 2 years following Hudaybiyah, more people embraced Islam than in all the previous years since the Prophet's mission began. The peace allowed for trade, travel, and communication that had been impossible during the period of conflict. Former enemies had the opportunity to observe the Muslim community's character and hear their message without the hostility that warfare inevitably generates. Among those who converted during this period was Khalid ibn al-Walid, the brilliant cavalry commander who had inflicted such damage at Uug. His embrace of Islam brought to the Muslim cause one of Arabia's greatest military minds and demonstrated the treaty's power to transform enemies into allies through peaceful contact rather than violent confrontation. The rain falls gently now, as if blessing the memory of that moment when wisdom triumphed over pride, when strategic patience overcame tactical impatience, and when a treaty that seemed like defeat became the foundation for ultimate victory. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah taught the Muslim community that Allah's ways are often mysterious and that apparent setbacks can become the means for achieving greater success than any military victory could provide. The fragile peace established at Hudaybiyah endured for nearly 2 years, allowing Islam to spread throughout Arabia as tribes witnessed the character and conduct of the Muslim community during this period of truce. Trade flourished. Diplomatic exchanges increased, and many who had previously known the Muslims only as enemies discovered in them neighbors guided by principles of justice and mercy that transcended tribal boundaries. But the treaty's end came not through Muhammad's choice but through the actions of the Quraysh and their allies. The Banu Bakr tribe, allied with Makkah, launched a night attack against the Khuzar tribe, who had aligned themselves with the Muslims during the Hudaybiyah negotiations. The assault was particularly treacherous because it occurred during the sacred months when Arabian custom prohibited warfare, and because the Quraysh provided weapons and even sent warriors to participate in the violation of their own treaty. When survivors of the massacre reached Medina with accounts of the unprovoked attack, they stood before Muhammad in the mosque and recited verses that would echo through history. "O Muhammad, call upon Allah for us. Through the alliance that bound your grandfather Abd al-Muttalib to our ancestors. The Quraysh have aided our enemies against us, attacking us at night while we slept, killing us even as we prostrated in prayer." The Prophet's response was immediate and decisive. The Quraysh had not merely broken their treaty obligations but had violated the sacred months, attacked allies of the Muslims, and demonstrated that their word could not be trusted. Yet even in this moment of justified anger, Muhammad's first impulse was to offer his enemies an opportunity to make amends and restore the peace that had benefited all parties. He sent a message to Makkah offering 3 alternatives: pay blood money for those killed, abandon their alliance with Banu Bakr, or consider the Treaty of Hudaybiyah null and void. The Quraysh leadership, perhaps emboldened by their recent military success or overconfident in their ability to defend their city, chose the third option with defiant arrogance. Abu Sufyan himself traveled to Medina in a desperate last-minute attempt to renew the treaty, but his mission failed when it became clear that the Quraysh were unwilling to make the concessions necessary for genuine peace. The preparations for what would become known as the conquest of Makkah were conducted with unprecedented secrecy and speed. Muhammad ordered his commanders to gather their forces without revealing the destination, sending messages to allied tribes throughout the region, calling for their support in a campaign whose objectives remained deliberately vague. The strategy was designed to prevent the Quraysh from preparing adequate defenses or calling upon their own allies for assistance. When the various contingents converged on Medina, the assembled force numbered 10,000 men, the largest army ever to march under Islamic banners. Warriors came from every tribe that had embraced Islam, from the Ansar of Medina to Bedouin clans from the farthest reaches of the peninsula. Yet this was no ordinary army motivated by plunder or conquest, but a force united by faith and guided by principles that would transform the very nature of warfare. As the massive force moved toward Makkah, Muhammad issued orders that revealed his intentions and character. There would be no killing of non-combatants, no destruction of property, no harming of trees or crops, and no forced conversions. The expedition's purpose was not revenge but the restoration of the Kaaba to its original function as a house of worship for the one true God, free from the idols that had defiled it for centuries. The army advanced through terrain familiar to Muhammad from his youth, past the wells where he had watered flocks as a shepherd, over hills where he had accompanied trade caravans, through valleys where he had contemplated the mysteries of existence before his prophetic calling. Now he returned not as a refugee or exile, but as the leader of a movement that had grown beyond anything his enemies had imagined possible. The Quraysh scouts who brought news of the approaching army reported numbers that filled the city with despair. 10,000 warriors, disciplined and motivated, led by commanders whose tactical skills had been proven in previous battles, approaching a city whose own military capacity had been significantly weakened by years of conflict and the departure of many young men to join the Muslim cause. Abu Sufyan, recognizing the impossibility of defending Makkah against such overwhelming force, rode out under cover of darkness to seek terms for surrender. His meeting with Muhammad, arranged through the intervention of Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle who had remained in Makkah, demonstrated both the futility of resistance and the mercy that characterized Islamic justice. "Have you not yet recognized that there is no God but Allah?" Muhammad asked his longtime adversary with the gentle persistence that had marked his preaching for over 20 years. Abu Sufyan's conversion that night was born not of fear but of genuine recognition that the man he had opposed was indeed the messenger of God, whose message had triumphed through divine assistance rather than mere human ambition. The conquest itself unfolded with a restraint that astonished both sides. The city that had expelled Muhammad and persecuted his followers was entered peacefully, with the Muslim forces maintaining discipline that contrasted sharply with the typical practices of Arabian warfare. No houses were looted, no civilians harmed, no revenge taken against those who had inflicted years of suffering upon the early Muslim community. Muhammad's first destination was the Kaaba, the sacred house that had been his spiritual focus throughout his life. The building stood surrounded by 360 idols representing the various tribes and deities venerated throughout Arabia, accumulations of centuries of polytheistic worship that had obscured the original monotheistic foundation laid by Ibrahim and Ismail. With his own hands, Muhammad began the destruction of these idols, reciting verses that had been revealed years earlier. "Say truth has come, and falsehood has departed. Indeed, falsehood is destined to depart." One by one the carved stones and wooden figures fell before the gentle touch of truth, their destruction marking not the triumph of one tribe over another, but the restoration of pure worship to the house that had always belonged to Allah alone. When the people of Makkah gathered in the courtyard of the Kaaba, many expecting punishment for their years of opposition, Muhammad addressed them with words that would define the character of Islamic conquest throughout history. "What do you think I will do with you?" he asked the assembled crowd. They replied, "You are a noble brother, son of a noble brother." His response became legendary. "I say to you what Yusuf said to his brothers, no blame will be upon you today. Go, for you are free." This general amnesty, granted to people who had persecuted, exiled and fought against the Muslims for decades, represented a revolutionary approach to victory that prioritized reconciliation over revenge. Former enemies like Hind bint Utbah, who had mutilated Hamza's body at Uhud, found themselves forgiven and welcomed into the community they had sought to destroy. The mass conversions that followed were not the result of coercion, but of recognition. People who had opposed Islam for years suddenly understood that a movement capable of such mercy and victory must indeed be guided by divine grace. The same character traits that had earned Muhammad the title Al-Amin in his youth. Honesty, justice, compassion not demonstrated themselves on a scale that encompassed entire cities and tribes. As the rain continues to fall over the sacred city, washing the ancient stones of the Kaaba, where Abraham once prayed, and Muhammad restored pure worship, we reflect on this moment when power was tempered by mercy, when victory became an opportunity for forgiveness, and when the conquest of a city became the liberation of countless hearts from the chains of hatred and vengeance. The conquest of Makkah represented the fulfillment of the Prophet's vision at Hudaybiyah and the validation of his patient approach to conflict resolution. Through restraint rather than aggression, through mercy rather than revenge, the city that had rejected him became the center from which his message would spread to the ends of the earth. 2 years had passed since the peaceful conquest of Makkah, and Islam had spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula with unprecedented speed. Tribes that had warred against each other for generations now stood united under the banner of monotheism, their ancient feuds dissolved in the light of divine guidance. The Kaaba, cleansed of its idols, once again served as the focal point for pure worship as Ibrahim had originally intended. In the 10th year after the Hijra, Muhammad announced his intention to perform the pilgrimage to Makkah, the first time he would complete the full rites since his prophetic mission began. Word of the Prophet's pilgrimage spread across Arabia like wildfire, and Muslims began converging on Medina from every corner of the peninsula, eager to accompany their beloved leader on this sacred journey and learn the proper rituals directly from the one who had received divine guidance. The gathering was extraordinary in both size and significance. More than 100,000 believers assembled in and around Medina, representing every tribe that had embraced Islam and creating the largest peaceful congregation in Arabian history. They came not as warriors or raiders, but as pilgrims, united by faith rather than tribal allegiance, seeking spiritual purification rather than worldly gain. The journey to Makkah became a moving university of Islamic practice. As the vast caravan made its way across the familiar desert routes, Muhammad taught the proper procedures for pilgrimage, while demonstrating through his own actions the principles that would guide Muslim worship for all future generations. Every gesture, every prayer, every ritual was observed and memorized by companions who understood they were witnessing the final codification of their religious practices. When the pilgrims reached the sacred precincts of Makkah, the transformation was evident to all who remembered the city before Islam. Where once crowds had gathered to worship hundreds of different idols, now a sea of white-robed believers circumambulated the Kaaba in unified devotion to Allah alone. The ancient rites that Ibrahim had established were restored to their original purity, stripped of the polytheistic additions that had accumulated over centuries. Muhammad's performance of the pilgrimage rituals served as the definitive model for all future generations. His circumambulation of the Kaaba, his prayers at the station of Ibrahim, his running between the hills of Safa and Marwa, and his journey to the surrounding holy sites became the template that millions would follow. Yet more significant than the ritual details was the spiritual atmosphere he created, one of humility, devotion, and complete submission to divine will. But the most momentous occasion of this pilgrimage occurred on the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah, when the vast multitude gathered on the plain of Arafat for the climactic day of the pilgrimage. This barren valley, surrounded by low hills under the blazing Arabian sun, became the setting for what many companions sensed would be their prophet's final public address to the entire Muslim community. Muhammad stood upon his camel, Al-Qaswa, while a sea of white garments stretched to the horizon in every direction. The silence was profound as over 100,000 people strained to hear every word, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing a moment of supreme historical importance. The Prophet's voice, though weakened by age and the burdens of leadership, carried clearly across the assembly as he delivered his farewell sermon. "O people," he began, his words echoing across the plain, "listen to my words, for I do not know whether I will ever meet you again after this year in this place." The weight of these opening words settled upon the crowd like a physical presence, and many eyes filled with tears as they grasped the implication of his statement. The sermon that followed encompassed the fundamental principles that would guide Islamic civilization for centuries to come. Muhammad spoke of the sanctity of human life and property, declaring that the life and wealth of every Muslim was sacred to every other Muslim. He abolished the blood feuds and usury that had plagued Arabian society, proclaiming that all debts of honor from the pre-Islamic period were forgiven, and that the cycle of tribal revenge must end forever. His words on social justice resonated across the assembly with revolutionary force. "O people, your Lord is one, and your Father is one. All of you are from Adam, and Adam was from dust. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. A white person has no superiority over a black person, nor does a black person have superiority over a white person, except by righteousness and good action." These principles shattered the foundations of the tribal aristocracy that had dominated Arabian society for generations. In a culture where lineage determined status and racial prejudice was commonplace, Muhammad's declaration of human equality, based solely on moral character, represented a transformation as radical as any political revolution. The Prophet's guidance regarding the treatment of women carried particular significance in a society where female infanticide had been common and women's rights severely limited. "Treat women well," he urged the assembly, "for they are your partners and committed helpers. You have rights over them, and they have rights over you." As the sermon reached its climax, Muhammad posed a question that would echo through history: "Have I conveyed the message?" The response thundered across the plain as 100,000 voices replied in unison, "Yes, you have conveyed it." He raised his finger toward the heavens and declared, "O Allah, bear witness. O Allah, bear witness. O Allah, bear witness." At that moment the final revelation descended upon Muhammad as he stood before the assembled multitude. The words of Surah Al-Ma'idah filled his heart and flowed from his lips. "This day I have perfected for you your religion, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion." The mission that had begun 23 years earlier in the cave of Hira was now complete. The impact of these words was immediately apparent to those who understood their significance. Abu Bakr and other close companions wept openly, recognizing that the completion of the religion meant the approaching end of the Prophet's earthly mission. The revelation that should have brought joy instead filled their hearts with the bittersweet knowledge that their beloved leader's time among them was drawing to a close. The remainder of the pilgrimage proceeded with ceremonies that took on added poignancy in light of the farewell sermon. The sacrifice at Mina, the stoning of the pillars representing Satan's temptations, and the final circumambulation of the Kaaba became farewell rituals as Muhammad completed each act with the deliberate care of one who knew he might never perform them again. The return journey to Medina was marked by the same sense of ending that had characterized the pilgrimage itself. The Prophet, visibly weakened by the exertions of the journey and the weight of delivering his final message, rode more slowly than usual, often stopping to rest and pray. His companions formed a protective circle around him, treasuring every moment they could spend in his presence. During the journey, Muhammad fell ill with a fever that would persist for the remainder of his life. Yet even in sickness he continued to teach and guide his community, using his own approaching death as a lesson in the transitory nature of earthly existence and the importance of preparing for the eternal life to come. The farewell pilgrimage had accomplished far more than the ritual purification of individual souls. It had served as the final consolidation of Islamic practice and belief, the ultimate demonstration of Muslim unity, and the definitive statement of the principles that would guide the community after their prophet's departure. The 100,000 witnesses to these events would carry his teachings to every corner of the expanding Islamic world, ensuring that the purity of his message would be preserved for future generations. As the rain continues to fall over the sacred sites where these momentous events unfolded, we reflect on the wisdom of a man who knew his time was ending and used his final public appearance to establish the foundations for a civilization that would endure long after his earthly departure. The farewell pilgrimage represented not just the completion of Muhammad's mission but the beginning of Islam's transformation from a regional Arabian movement into a global religion that would guide humanity across centuries and continents. The illness that had begun during the return from the farewell pilgrimage grew steadily worse as the weeks passed. Muhammad, now in his 63rd year, felt the weight of his earthly mission drawing to a close. The fever that racked his body was accompanied by severe headaches, yet his concern remained focused not on his own suffering but on the welfare of the community he would soon leave behind. During his final weeks, Muhammad continued to lead the prayers whenever his strength permitted, rising from his bed in the simple chamber adjoining the mosque to guide his companions in the worship that had formed the cornerstone of their faith. His voice, though weakened by illness, still carried the same gentle authority that had first called them from darkness into light over 20 years before. The Prophet's wives took turns caring for him as he moved between their chambers, but he expressed a desire to spend his final days in the room of Aisha bint Abi Bakr, the daughter of his closest companion and the wife who had been his comfort during the later years of his mission. She was barely 18 years old, yet she showed a wisdom and devotion that provided solace to the dying Prophet during his most vulnerable moments. In those quiet hours between the dawn and morning prayers, when the mosque grew still and the city of Medina rested in peaceful slumber, Muhammad would share final guidance with the small circle of companions who maintained constant vigil at his bedside. His words carried the weight of ultimate farewell, each sentence preserved in the hearts of men who knew they were receiving the last teachings of their beloved guide. Be mindful of Allah regarding the prayers, he whispered with effort, his breath coming in short gasps between phrases. Be mindful of Allah regarding your slaves. A ruler who is given charge of the affairs of Muslims and who does not strive diligently for their betterment and does not serve them sincerely shall not enter paradise with them. Even in his final moments, his thoughts remained centered on justice, responsibility, and the welfare of those who would continue the mission after his departure. The companions took turns reading verses from the Qur'an at his bedside, reciting the revelations that had descended through his lips over the course of his prophetic mission. The words that had once filled him with divine fire now provided comfort as his soul prepared for its return to the Creator. Surah al-Ikhlas, The chapter proclaiming Allah's absolute unity was among his favorites during these final days, its simple yet profound message echoing the fundamental truth he had spent his life proclaiming. As his condition deteriorated, Muhammad made arrangements for the continuity of community worship and governance. He asked Abu Bakr, his oldest friend and most trusted companion, to lead the prayers in his place, a quiet but significant indication of his confidence in the man who would guide the Muslim community through the turbulent period following his death. The appointment of Abu Bakr as prayer leader was not lost on the companions who had gathered in Medina, many of whom had come from distant parts of Arabia upon hearing of their prophet's illness. The choice spoke volumes about character and trust, for in a society where leadership often passed through family lines or military strength, Muhammad's selection was based purely on spiritual merit and proven devotion to the cause of Islam. During one of his final public appearances, Muhammad managed to rise from his sickbed and part the curtains separating Aisha's chamber from the main mosque. The sight that greeted him filled his heart with profound joy. Hundreds of believers standing in perfect rows behind Abu Bakr, united in prayer as he had always envisioned. The community he had nurtured from a handful of persecuted believers into a nation spanning the Arabian Peninsula stood before him in harmonious worship. A smile spread across his weakened features as he watched the congregation, and those who saw that final smile would never forget its radiance. It was the expression of a man who had completed his life's work and could see that the seeds he had planted would continue to bear fruit long after his departure. He remained standing for several moments, drinking in the sight of his spiritual children united in submission to Allah before returning to his chamber for the last time. The final day of his earthly life began like many others, with the call to prayer echoing across Medina as the faithful prepared for their morning worship. Muhammad roused himself with great difficulty and asked to be helped to the mosque, but his strength failed him before he could rise from his bed. The realization that he would never again lead his community in prayer brought tears to his eyes, though they were tears of gratitude rather than regret. As the morning advanced and his breathing became more labored, the Prophet's family and closest companions gathered around his bed. Ali ibn Abi Talib, his cousin and son-in-law who had been among the first to embrace Islam, sat at his right side. Abbas ibn Abi al-Muttalib, his uncle who had protected him during the dangerous years in Makkah, held his left hand. Fatima, his beloved daughter, wept quietly as she watched her father's life ebbing away. In his final conscious moments, Muhammad's lips moved in barely audible prayer, repeating the words that had been his constant companion throughout his prophetic mission. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but Allah. The declaration of divine unity that had begun his mission would also conclude it, the fundamental truth that had transformed Arabian society flowing from his lips until his final breath. Aisha would later recall that in his very last moments, Muhammad raised his eyes toward the ceiling of the chamber and whispered, "With the highest companions in paradise." His soul, freed from its earthly vessel, returned to the Creator who had sent him as a mercy to all the worlds. The news of the Prophet's death spread through Medina like a wave of shock and disbelief. Umar ibn al-Khattab, overcome with grief and denial, drew his sword and declared that anyone who claimed Muhammad had died would be struck down. The man who had been the center of their universe, the source of guidance and inspiration for over 20 years, could not simply be gone. But Abu Bakr, demonstrating the wisdom that would characterize his leadership of the community, addressed the assembled believers with words that became legendary in Islamic history. "Whoever used to worship Muhammad should know that Muhammad is dead," he declared with calm authority. "But whoever worships Allah should know that Allah is alive and never dies." He then recited the Quranic verse that had been revealed after the Battle of Uhud: "Muhammad is no more than a messenger. Many messengers have passed away before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels?" The body of the Prophet was washed and shrouded according to Islamic custom by his closest family members, including Ali, Abbas, and his adopted sons. No elaborate funeral preparations were made, for Muhammad had instructed that prophets should be buried simply in the place where they died. His grave was prepared in the floor of Aisha's chamber, the same modest room where he had breathed his last. The funeral prayer was conducted not as a single congregation but in small groups throughout the day, as the entire population of Medina came to pay their final respects to the man who had transformed their city from a place of tribal conflict into the capital of a new civilization. There was no ornate ceremony, no golden coffin, no monument to worldly power, only the simple burial of a man who had lived with humility and died as he had lived. As the rain continues to fall over the blessed city where these events unfolded, we reflect on the profound truth that death comes to all human beings, even to prophets and messengers. Yet the message Muhammad carried, the example he set, and the community he built would outlive his physical presence by centuries. His return to Allah marked not an ending but a transformation, as the man became a memory, and the memory became eternal guidance for all who would follow in his footsteps. The rain falls gently on his grave in Medina, where millions of pilgrims continue to come seeking blessings and remembering the one who brought divine light into a world shrouded in darkness. Though his voice is no longer heard in the streets of the city he made holy, his teachings continue to guide hearts across every continent, and his love continues to inspire souls seeking the path to their Creator. In the days that followed Muhammad's burial, the city of Medina fell into a profound silence that seemed to echo with the absence of the voice that had guided them for over 2 decades. The mosque where he had led prayers now felt vast and empty, though it remained filled with believers who came seeking comfort in the familiar rituals he had established. The simple chamber where he had lived and died became a place of pilgrimage, where companions would sit in quiet remembrance of the man who had transformed their understanding of existence itself. Yet even in their grief, the community Muhammad had built demonstrated the strength of the foundations he had laid. Abu Bakr, now recognized as the first Caliph Morse, the successor who would guide the community in temporal matters while preserving the spiritual legacy of the Prophet, addressed the assembled believers with words that revealed the true nature of their loss and their continuing mission. Muhammad has died, Abu Bakr declared to the gathered multitude, but the message he brought is eternal. The Qur'an remains with us unchanged. The prayers he taught us continue to rise to heaven, and the example he set for us will guide every step we take until we join him in paradise. We have not lost our guide, we have gained eternal guidance. The wisdom of these words became apparent as the years unfolded, and Islam began its remarkable expansion beyond the borders of Arabia. The principles Muhammad had established, the character he had exemplified, and the Quranic revelation he had preserved became the foundation for a civilization that would stretch from Spain to Central Asia, encompassing peoples of every race, language, and cultural background under the banner of universal brotherhood. The companions who had lived with Muhammad began the great work of preserving every detail of his life and teachings. Abu Hurairah, who had memorized thousands of the Prophet's sayings, became a living library of prophetic wisdom. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, drawing upon her intimate knowledge of his private life and public conduct, taught subsequent generations about the human qualities that had made him beloved even to his enemies. Ibn Abbas, the Prophet's young cousin, dedicated his long life to explaining the Quranic revelations and their practical applications. These preservation efforts ensured that Muhammad's influence would not diminish with the passage of time, but would actually grow stronger as more people encountered the detailed record of his character and conduct. The Hadith literature collections of his sayings, actions, and approvals became a second source of guidance alongside the Quran, providing practical examples of how divine principles could be implemented in human society. The speed with which Islam spread after Muhammad's death astonished both believers and skeptics. Within a century, Muslim armies had conquered vast territories not through forced conversion, but through the appeal of Islamic justice and the character of its adherents. The Byzantines and Persians, who had fought each other for generations, found their empires replaced by a new order that offered religious tolerance, efficient administration, and social mobility based on merit rather than birth. But the most remarkable aspect of this expansion was not its military success but its spiritual impact. In Syria, Christians found in Islam a return to the monotheistic purity they felt had been lost in theological controversies. In Persia, Zoroastrians discovered principles of cosmic justice that resonated with their ancient traditions. In Egypt, Coptic Christians welcomed Muslim rule as liberation from Byzantine oppression. In Spain, Jewish communities flourished under Islamic protection after centuries of persecution. The Quranic principle that there is no compulsion in religion became the foundation for a pluralistic civilization that preserved and transmitted the knowledge of ancient Greece, Persia, and India, while developing new sciences, arts, and technologies. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the universities of Cordoba and Cairo, and the libraries of Timbuktu became centers of learning that attracted scholars from every faith and background. Muhammad's emphasis on seeking knowledge found expression in an intellectual renaissance that advanced human understanding in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, chemistry, and philosophy. Muslim scholars like al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and al-Jazari made discoveries that would later fuel the European Renaissance, demonstrating the practical fruits of the Prophet's teaching that the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. The social reforms Muhammad had introduced in 7th century Arabia became models for progressive societies across the medieval world. The rights of women, though interpreted differently in various cultures and periods, were generally more extensive in Muslim societies than in their Christian or non-religious counterparts. The prohibition of usury led to sophisticated banking systems based on profit sharing rather than interest. The institution of zakat created welfare systems that provided for the poor and disadvantaged centuries before similar programs appeared in other civilizations. The architectural legacy of Islamic civilization reflected the spiritual principles Muhammad had taught. From the soaring arches of the great mosque of Cordoba to the perfect geometries of the Taj Mahal, Islamic art avoided representations of living beings while creating spaces that lifted the human spirit toward contemplation of divine beauty. The call to prayer that Bilal had first intoned from the roof of the Prophet's mosque in Medina now echoed from minarets across 3 continents, creating a daily rhythm of spiritual remembrance that united diverse populations in common worship. Yet the most enduring legacy of Muhammad's mission was not institutional or architectural but personal and spiritual. The 5 daily prayers he had received during his night journey continued to structure the lives of believers, creating moments of reflection and submission that brought divine consciousness into the most mundane activities. The month of Ramadan became an annual spiritual renovation that reminded participants of their dependence on Allah and their responsibility to the less fortunate. The pilgrimage to Makkah, which Muhammad had demonstrated during his farewell journey, became a powerful symbol of human equality and divine unity. Each year, millions of believers from every corner of the earth would gather in the sacred precincts, wearing identical white garments that erased all distinctions of race, nationality, and social status. The sight of this annual gathering fulfilled the Prophet's vision of humanity united in worship of their common Creator. The Quranic revelation that had descended through Muhammad's heart continued to guide individual lives and entire societies. Its verses on justice inspired legal systems, its teachings on compassion shaped social policies, and its call to worship Allah alone provided the spiritual foundation for personal transformation. The book that had begun with the command to read in the cave of Hira became the most widely read and memorized text in human history. Perhaps most remarkably, the character traits that had earned Muhammad the title Al-Amin in pre-Islamic Makkah became the aspiration of countless believers who sought to follow his example in their own lives. His truthfulness, compassion, justice, humility, and courage provided a human model of divine attributes that made righteousness seem achievable rather than impossibly distant. The stories of his interactions with children, his kindness to animals, his forgiveness of enemies, and his care for the poor became sources of inspiration that transcended cultural and temporal boundaries. A Sufi mystic in medieval Persia, a scholar in Andalusian Spain, a trader in the markets of Delhi, and a farmer in the villages of West Africa could all find in Muhammad's example guidance for their particular circumstances and challenges. As centuries passed and Islamic civilization experienced periods of both triumph and decline, the core message Muhammad had delivered remained constant: there is no God but Allah, and human beings find their highest purpose in submission to divine will expressed through justice, compassion, and service to others. This message proved capable of inspiring reform and renewal in every generation, providing the spiritual resources necessary for communities to address new challenges while maintaining their essential identity. The rain continues to fall gently over the lands where Muhammad once walked, where his companions carried his message, and where millions of their spiritual descendants continue to find in his example the light that guides them through the complexities of modern life. His physical presence may have departed this world 14 centuries ago, but his influence on human consciousness grows stronger with each passing generation, as new hearts discover in his teachings the peace, purpose, and divine connection that every soul seeks. As the gentle rain continues its blessed descent, washing the earth as mercy washes the human heart, we reach the end of our journey through the life and teachings of Muhammad, the final messenger whose light continues to illuminate the path for seekers across every land and every age. The story that began in the cave of Hira with divine revelation has woven itself through centuries of human experience, touching lives in ways both profound and subtle. The verses of Surah Muhammad that we have reflected upon tonight carry within them the essence of his mission and the timeless relevance of his message. Those who believe and work righteousness and believe in what was sent down to Muhammad, and it is the truth from their Lord, he remits their sins and relieves their concerns. These words speak not only to his contemporaries, but to every soul that yearns for divine forgiveness and the peace that comes from walking in harmony with the Creator's will. In our modern world, where technology connects us across vast distances yet often leaves us feeling isolated and purposeless, the example of Muhammad offers guidance that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. His emphasis on community building, social justice, and spiritual development addresses the deepest needs of human nature. The Constitution of Medina speaks to contemporary discussions about pluralism and tolerance. His treatment of women, the poor, and minorities provides models for progressive social policy. His emphasis on education and knowledge acquisition resonates with societies seeking to balance material advancement with spiritual growth. The character traits that made him beloved even to his former enemies, his truthfulness, compassion, humility, and an unwavering commitment to justice, remain as relevant today as they were 14 centuries ago. In a world often dominated by self-promotion and material ambition, his example of servant leadership offers an alternative model of success measured not by wealth or power but by service to others and submission to divine guidance. The Quranic revelation that came through his lips continues to provide comfort to the afflicted, guidance to the confused, and hope to the despairing. Its verses on patience speak to those enduring hardship, its teachings on forgiveness offer healing to wounded hearts, and its promises of divine mercy provide solace to those burdened by their failures and shortcomings. The book that transformed the deserts of Arabia continues to transform individual lives across every continent. Perhaps most remarkably, the message Muhammad delivered has proven capable of inspiring both personal transformation and social reform in every generation. The civil rights movement in America drew inspiration from Islamic principles of human equality. The independence movements of the 20th century found in Islamic concepts of justice and self-determination the intellectual framework for their struggles against oppression. Contemporary efforts to address poverty, environmental degradation and social inequality continue to find resources in the prophetic teachings about stewardship, compassion and collective responsibility. The mosque that began as a simple courtyard in Medina has become a global institution, providing not only spaces for worship, but centers for education, social services and community building. The call to prayer that once echoed only through the streets of the Prophet's city now marks the rhythm of daily life for over 1 billion believers, creating moments of spiritual reflection that interrupt the relentless pace of modern existence. The pilgrimage that Muhammad demonstrated during his farewell journey continues to serve as a powerful symbol of human unity and divine purpose. Each year, the sight of millions of believers from every race, nationality and social background standing together in identical white garments serves as a reminder that beneath surface differences lies a common humanity united by shared spiritual aspirations. Yet the true measure of Muhammad's legacy lies not in the grand institutions or impressive statistics, but in the quiet transformations that occur daily in individual hearts touched by his example. The businessman who chooses honesty over profit because he remembers the Prophet's integrity in trade. The parent who responds to a child's disobedience with patience rather than anger, following the model of divine mercy. The community leader who serves the poor and marginalized, inspired by prophetic teachings about social responsibility. As we conclude our reflection on this blessed night, with rain continuing to fall like divine blessing upon the earth, we remember that Muhammad's message was ultimately simple yet profound. Recognize the unity of the Creator, treat all creation with compassion and justice, and prepare for the eternal life that awaits beyond this temporary existence. This message, delivered by an orphan child who became the most influential person in human history, continues to offer hope and guidance to a world still struggling with the same fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and the proper relationship between human beings and their Creator. The light that began in the Arabian Peninsula has spread to every corner of the earth, not through conquest or coercion, but through the power of truth to illuminate hearts prepared to receive it. In madrasas and universities, in mosques and homes, in marketplaces and government halls, the teachings and example of Muhammad continue to shape human consciousness and social development. The rain falls softly now as our journey ends, each drop a reminder of divine mercy that encompasses all creation. In the sound of water touching earth, we hear an echo of the Prophet's gentle voice calling humanity to remember their Creator, to treat each other with kindness, and to live each day in preparation for the eternal return to the One who made them. His physical presence departed this world centuries ago, but his spiritual influence grows stronger with each passing generation, as new hearts discover in his teachings the peace, purpose, and divine connection that every soul ultimately seeks. May the light of his example guide us all toward truth. May his teachings bring peace to troubled hearts, and may his love for humanity inspire us to build a world worthy of the divine mercy that surrounds us always. In this blessed night of reflection, as rain cleanses the earth and memories illuminate the soul, we rest in gratitude for the gift of prophetic guidance that continues to light the path home. Thank you for resting with me and listening to these reminders from the Qur'an. If you like to continue this journey of peace and reflection, please subscribe for future episodes. Together we can keep learning and finding calm through the words of Allah.